All right. Hey guys, I am so excited for this week. This week I have, this is how like it goes now all the time that I've used everybody that I know personally, but another amazing person that I have met over social media. I have Lydia and I am so excited to hear her story. She is a fellow adoptee and she has got some beautiful, beautiful kiddos, because I have, yes, of course, I go look on people's social media pages, but I will go ahead and have her share her story. And I'm so excited to hear from her. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lydia. So my story starts when my parents couldn't have children. My mom and my dad were married for quite a few years before they tried for several years to get pregnant and they never could. And so they adopted my brother Peter through the LDS program at the time. And then we had a family friend, like my cousin, her family knew this woman in her ward she was 16 at the time. She gave birth to a boy, and my cousin came to my parents because they knew they were looking to adopt, said, hey, do you want to adopt her kid? And so it's kind of a weird thing, but my parents are like, yes, we want to adopt her son. So they went ahead, and at the time they didn't know the gender or anything. She was still pregnant, but they went ahead and adopted my brother. And I am the baby, I'm the youngest. And then my parents at the time had two, and they just felt like they needed one more. And my dad he was born in the US, but was kind of raised in Mexico. And so my parents were looking for, Hispanic babies because they wanted to have, Hispanic children. And my parents decided to go ahead and adopt from Guatemala. Now, I don't know really to like how they came about like adopting from Guatemala specifically, but when they went ahead and started looking, they were able to find my birth mom. I believe she was like 15 or 16 at the time. Obviously, it was not a planned pregnancy. And her grandmother, or her mom, I guess, my birth grandmother, was the one who did all the paperwork for getting the adoption finalized and everything. I did spend some time in what's it called? A oh my gosh, I can't think of the word. Like a foster care kind of place. But it wasn't very long. I was only 4 months when my parents were able to finally come and pick me up. They did go and meet me prior to that once, I think. And my mom and dad went and kind of explored Guatemala a little bit, and that's where I'm from. Um, and they decided to kind of look around, get to see the place. They did some paperwork down there the first time when they got to meet me and everything, and kind of finalized a few things. And it's actually a really cool story. So when my parents were deciding to adopt me, they had a really hard time picking a name. My mom really wanted to name me Betsy, which is after her mother. And my dad really wanted to name me Lydia. My mom's like, no, Lydia's a family scandal name. Like on her side, it was like a scandal to name someone Lydia because at the time, well, it was like quite a while ago, but my great, great, great aunt was named Lydia. And she apparently was in love with her sister's husband and came on to him, as the story goes, said, hey, you need to leave my sister for me. And he was like, I'm not doing that. And so she shot him. And then I can't remember quite how the story goes, but I think she ended up either shooting herself or something along those lines. And so, for quite a few years, they were like, hush, hush. Like, I don't even think she has a burial stone. It was quite the interesting story. So anyways, my mom was so against the name, and my dad was really persistent. He's like, no, I really feel like it needs to be Lydia. And sure enough, my mom went to go talk to her father at the time and said, hey, what do you think if we named our daughter Lydia? And he's like, oh, no one would care. It's fine. Enough time has gone by that it's not a big deal. And so sure enough, they decided, okay, we'll name Lydia Lydia. So they get down there, they're finalizing the paperwork. And as they're doing so, they found out that my birth grandmother's name was Lydia. And she was the one who was doing all the paperwork and getting everything ready and, finalizing everything. And I think my parents felt very at peace knowing, and she felt very at peace knowing, like, okay, there's still going to be a part of, us with the family that she leaves. And so growing up, that was always a fun story to tell because my name had so much meaning behind it. And again, my mom fought. Oh, she fought for the name Betsy, but I guess I was never meant to be a Betsy. So anyways, I was about 4 months old when they finally were able to pick me up and go home. And so growing up, I always knew I was adopted. It was never a secret. Like my brothers always knew they were adopted. We always talked about it as a family. And so I never felt like ashamed or like I didn't belong or anything like that. My family was my family. And still to this day, like I feel like the family I grew up in is my family. And so growing up, it was definitely something that I feel like not a lot of kids knew about. So, especially like in elementary school, I definitely had a lot of questions at first. Like when I was in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the kids that were new in my class would always ask, like, oh, you're adopted. Oh, okay, cool. But no one ever, it was really actually quite funny. No one ever had like a bad stigma against adoption or anything like that. So I was never really teased for being adopted or anything. Oh, actually, it was quite a joke when I was in kindergarten. A lot of girls that I was friends with would say, oh, can you adopt me? And like, it was kind of like a sweet, like, oh, we want to adopt you type of thing. Like we understand like from their 6 year old or from their, what is it? 5, 6 year old mind, like, oh, hey, adoption means we get to be friends, we get to be with you. So it was kind of a sweet thing growing up. I never had like any bad feelings towards, adoptees or anything. But growing up, I feel like my family was my family and we all kind of grew together. Um, it wasn't really until high school that I feel like I had a little bit more, not necessarily prejudice, but I had a little more negative connotation with the name of adoption. And actually, it was really interesting. It was I think my senior year, and I was in class and I was saying, like, oh, yeah, I'm adopted. And it's funny because luckily I was able to grow up in a community where I had gone to school with pretty much the same kids from elementary to high school. Now, obviously, there was like a few other additions along the way from different schools plugging into a high school. But generally, everyone that knew me knew I was adopted, knew my story. So I really didn't have to like repeat myself. A lot of times I would get the question like, where are you from? Or, a lot of kids didn't understand like my ethnicity because, I can look more Indian in the summer, and that's like India from India, and so a lot of kids thought I was Indian, and I'd say, no, I'm actually Guatemalan. They're like, what's that? Where's that? Like, so it was a really good like conversation starter. And I think when I was little, I was more offended by that question of like, well, are you Indian? And it wasn't so much that it was a bad thing to be Indian, but it was just that that's not where I'm from. And so it like hurt my feelings that people wouldn't know that. But in reality, I mean, I don't think most adults could place me either. So asking a kid to place you is not going to be any better in that sense. So I feel like I've just gotten used to the conversation of, no, I'm actually Guatemalan. That's in Central America. I always have to follow up with where it is because, quite frankly, a lot of people don't know where it is. And so, anyways, in high school, getting back to the bad connotation. So, my friend, he was, I think, of Asian descent, and he was asking me, he's like, oh, I didn't know you were adopted. I said, yeah. He said it's great. Both my brothers are adopted and I love my family. And he's like, oh, wow. He's like, that's cool. He's like, oh, but I'm sorry you're adopted. And I was like, I didn't understand. I was like, why are you sorry? It was a really good thing. I was like, my circumstances would not have been great for me to stay in. Like, I was born to mom that was young, that had younger siblings. I think she was the middle child, if I'm correct. But she still had a lot of, time to go. She wasn't ready to be a mom, and that's okay. And I'm so glad she gave me up, because it gave me the opportunity to be with the family that I have now. And I had to explain that to him, like, look, it's a good thing. I'm so glad, because I was trying to tell him, like, I've been to Mexico before. I've actually never been back to Guatemala, but on the streets of Mexico, you see a lot of children sell bracelets, and a lot of kids are interactive with the tourism down there and trying to earn money for their families. I recognize that that could have very easily been something that I would have had to do if I had been left in that situation. And so I definitely feel blessed to be in the family that I'm in. And I told this guy, I was like, look, no, it's a great thing. We're so happy, it's a really positive. Oh, okay. And he was quite puzzled at the fact that it was a positive aspect. And I don't know if that's like related to his culture, or if it's just that he didn't quite understand what adoption was, which happens. But that was, I think, the first time that I've ever had like someone act like negatively towards an adoption. And I would say that's probably the only time I've really had someone act like negatively. But growing up, like I said, it was pretty normal. We had really good family dynamic. We actually lived across over in Germany for a few years, and I got to travel with my family. So I definitely had a lot of different life experiences being in the family that I did. Um, then going off to college, I feel like that's definitely when um people I had to like retell, like when you get out to college, you have to reinvent yourself, right? And so I definitely had to reshare my story quite a few times. And I feel like there were like positive and negatives, especially when you're dating someone. I could tell, like, oh, I'm not comfortable with that, or oh yeah, that's awesome, or so there's a lot of different responses. And I actually met someone who at the time had a sister that was adopted, but the rest of the family was, born from the birth mother. And so he was asking me all these questions of like, oh, is it weird being adopted? Like, well, how do you feel about being adopted? I was like, really? Honestly, when I was in high school and growing up, and I just never thought about like, oh, it's such a different thing to be adopted. I just always felt like this is my family. Like God literally chose me to be with my family. And I never had like a question of like, oh, these aren't the people I should be with. And so it was really interesting having those questions like thrown at me, because I had never really thought too deeply about it, I guess, because that was my normal. That was how I was raised. And so, yeah, I mean, my adoption overall was very positive. And I will say, I think the one thing that really helped make the transition so smooth is the fact that I always knew. I feel like if I had parents that hid it from me, or if I had different circumstances, I could definitely see how it could be something that wouldn't be smooth, or something that would be difficult to get your head around. Because if you're not told right off the bat, like, oh yeah, your siblings and you are adopted, growing up, it's hard to explain to a kid sometimes what it means and everything. But I feel like if you keep working at it, kids get it, they understand eventually. And so I think, you know, I can understand why a parent would choose not to, but I also think that my parents did a really good job in choosing to tell us and to let us know, because there was never resentment there. There was never like animosity of like, you lied to me, you didn't tell me this, you didn't share this with me, and this is who I am. So I feel like it was a really good experience for me, the fact that I always knew and it was never a question.
No, I love that. I love that. And that's how my parents were. And I'm actually like that person that you said. All my siblings that are in my family are biologically my parents, except for me. And so
Okay.
it's a little different parameter. I think it'd be like cool to have siblings that like were adopted like you, because they're all white which isn't a bad thing, but they're all white and then there's me. But it's crazy. I didn't catch it first. Like it didn't register like that you're from Guatemala, and it's so crazy. My husband has actually traveled there for work multiple times, and he says beautiful, beautiful place. I hope one day you can get there. Like
Yeah.
that would be awesome for you if you could. Um, what was I gonna? Oh, there was one thing I was gonna ask. Did you ever question like why was I given up for adoption or anything like that to your parents, or did they like maybe explain that to you in any sorts?
I feel like throughout the years, obviously, I feel like most adoptees, and I guess maybe not most, but I feel like that's always a question that any adoptee would have, right? Like that they'd be curious about. But growing up, my parents were very good at explaining, like, look, your mom was 15, 16, like she couldn't keep you. She didn't have the resources to keep you. She, you know, it's not so much that they were like, oh, she didn't want you, so she just, but they made sense of like how it came to be, right? They always explained to me why the situation was the situation. Like she had younger siblings, she was still in school. It wasn't the time for her to be a parent, So it was never like, yes, I always question like, oh, like, not necessarily out of like, why would she not want me, but like, oh, like just out of curiosity, like what happened? How did the situation come about? Because as much information as we were given, which wasn't very much, it seems like, they really don't know anything about my birth dad. He was not in the picture when she was putting me up for adoption. And so my parents really only had limited information on like how the circumstances came about and everything like that. So I think they tried their best to make sense and then give me the information which they had. And like I said, they never hid anything from me. And I think that really helped growing up, because even if I had that question of like, why did she give me up, or why wasn't I able to stay, I could always revert back to the information they had given me and being like, oh, that's right, she was 16, she was too young. And then being a teenager myself, I could understand like when I was 16, I was nowhere near ready to be a parent, and now being a mom, I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't be a parent at 16. Oh my goodness, I couldn't do it. And the people that do it are amazing. I know myself, and I know I wouldn't have been ready for that responsibility. And so I completely respect her decision to, and you know what? I think in a lot of instances, whatever the circumstances behind, giving your child up for adoption is, I honestly believe parents do it out of trying to, give their child a better life. And I think they think, okay, this is my way. I'm not ready. I'm not equipped. I can't do this for my child, but maybe someone else can. And I think that's such an important piece to look at when you're when you're an adoptee, because it's hard, because there is that abandonment, right? There is that feeling of like, well, I was given up. Someone didn't want me, but it's not necessarily that they didn't want you. It just might not have been the right time. And you were meant to go to somewhere else.
I love that. And I think honesty is a huge thing, like any relationship, even like us now with our own children. Like you just gotta be honest about things, because that's like really the only way that one, trust is going to be built with your child, but two, then, 100%, then it's just, I love it. Honesty 100% is the way to be, because seriously, it'll make things totally a lot easier. Oh, and when you were saying about like how at 16, yeah, I could never fathom being like pregnant at 16. And I feel like even at 25, when I got pregnant with my first, like at 25, I'm still like, what the heck are we doing? Like I'm still not prepared to have, you know what I mean? Because
Yes,
a kid is a huge responsibility. And like you said, I could not even fathom taking that on.
it's a huge responsibility, along with the fact that it's like financially, there's all of these different factors that come into to having a kid, right? And I think that's something that you really have to consider, looking at the bigger picture, right? I think I've had some people say like, oh, well, I'm still like, I've heard of some people being like angry at the situation. Oh, well, why couldn't they keep me? Why this and why that? And I think, like, I completely think that's valid in feeling that way. But I also feel like for myself, I had to recognize, like, look, I have to be at peace with this. Otherwise, it's going to be something that I'm going to battle my entire life, And in my circumstance, being born in Guatemala doesn't really give me the best opportunity to necessarily, like, if I ever wanted to search, which I really don't have any desire, but if I ever wanted to search out for my birth parents, I really couldn't, because of the language barrier, as well as, like, I just think finding someone in Guatemala would be a lot harder, you know. And so for me, I'm like, I have to find peace with certain things that I can't really get resolved. And so instead of looking at it as a negative and like, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why is this the way it is? I think it's best to come at it with a positive attitude and say, you know what, this did happen to me, but it's such a blessing in my life because I have the parents that love me. I have these parents that took care of me, and I understand not every adoptee has that circumstance, but in my case, I really did luck out with who I was adopted from, and who chose me. And literally, I think that's the one thing that my parents made so clear in for my entire life was that we chose you, Lydia. We chose you. We want you. We wanted you so bad that we were willing to move heaven and earth to find you. And I think that's such a special thing to have with a child, right? Not just, oh, we thought about having kids and we did it. We had kids. There's this special connection between finding your child, right?
No, I love that. And I'm not gonna lie, I had to do a couple double takes when I went on your social media because I was like, kind of looks like her mom and wait, because like I could tell they were Hispanic. So I'm like, wait, that like doesn't. And so, and I think that's awesome because most adoptees that I know, they're usually, unless they're white, not the same race as like their parents. And so I think that's amazing. Like when you first said that, I'm like, that's so awesome. That makes sense now, seeing those pictures, because I'm like, I don't know if it's biological family, but then I like read the caption and it was your mom and dad. So with that was going to be my next question, but you already answered that. So biological family, do you ever, like, you have no interest in seeking out or anything like that, is what you were saying, correct?
Yeah, I don't really, honestly, I think the only reason I ever would be more for like genealogy and like history purposes of like trying to figure out like my medical history, right? Because I feel like, especially now having kids of my own, I'm like, it's blank. Like, I have no idea what I could have in my family. And I think that is the real only thing that would entice me to go looking. But as of right now, I feel like it's not enough to really want, like, for me to open that can of worms, because I feel like when you go and search for your adoptive parents, sometimes it can be great, but sometimes it can't. And I feel like it's really just the luck of the draw with what you get. And so I feel like I'm not quite ready. Like, I don't honestly think I'll ever, not necessarily be ready, but I don't think that'll ever be something that'll interest me. And even if it does later down the road, I feel like it's always my choice to change my mind, And so as of right now, I'm like, I'm good, but definitely the one thing that would really make me search out is for medical history. And I think out of pure curiosity, right?
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Because when I turned 30 a couple years ago, that like, I mean, if I don't know if you've listened to my story at all, but that's when I was like, okay, I think I want to find my birth mom. But for me, my sole reason was to tell her thank you, to tell her thank you for what she did for everything that I have. And it's been an interesting parameter. And I'm like you, I'm an international adoptee, and I felt the same way as you. It's like, it ain't gonna happen. There's nothing that's gonna go on, like nothing and this and that. And dude, 100%, the Lord was in that, because I started looking, and 3 months later, they found her. Like,
wow, that's so quick.
Yeah, some girl on Facebook. It's crazy how all the, oh my gosh, the dominoes just aligned up. And like, the beautiful thing was I didn't have to spend a penny to find her, and just like, it's crazy. Social media is crazy. Like, that's how it happened. And this girl, and it's just, so, but I totally 100% you have to be at a point in your life if you ever want to be prepared, because there's a lot of emotional baggage that comes with it. Like that you may not be ready to crack open that part of your heart. And that's something that I'm like still working through, even though I've known him for like 3 years.
Mhm.
It's a lot. Like it really is. It's a lot because you learn more and more things. But I think that's beautiful, because being positive like that is like, honestly, I feel like most people should go through life like that, because it makes things better, even though you're going to have those hard and crappy and really, really hard times. And yes, of course, feel those feelings, wallow in that, whatever. But don't let it overtake you. Be as positive as you can. And I love that about you. I absolutely love that. And you can just tell that from you, that you are just a very positive person. And it's beautiful. Like I love it. Cause I'm like the same. I'm like, woo, like
I know. I'm the same way. Like I feel like sometimes it's hard because I do understand. I can understand having those negative feelings, right? Or those like thoughts of like uncertainty or not knowing or whatever may pop into your head. But at the end of the day, I'm like, but if I want to be happy, if I want to be at peace with myself, then it's so important to just be at peace and let myself know, okay, this is the circumstance. Yes, this is my reality, but that doesn't mean it has to be a bad reality. It means I get to choose whether or not I want it to be good or bad. And I'm in control of my circumstances and my situation from here on out. So what I do with it is what is up to me, right? Like that's my own fate. I get to choose that. I get to decide that. So if I want to be miserable about this situation, I can. But if I want to be positive and happy about it, then I can. And I think, we look for whatever we're feeling towards, right? If we want to see negative, that's what we're going to see. If we want to see positive, we're going to see positive. We're going to look for the positive. And I think, especially being an adoptee, it's something that, to be honest, it really doesn't cross my mind all that often. But now that I'm older, I would say definitely as a child, as a teen, even in college, it never really crossed my mind. It was just, that was my family, and I think having children of my own, it has definitely crossed my mind quite a bit because, it's funny. A lot of people do say like, oh, your daughter looks so much like your mom. And I laugh because, obviously it's not biological. And I think like, honestly, I'm just like, that's the Lord's way of saying like, yep, you're in the right family, because like, it's so true. My daughter does look like my mom. And I just laugh because there's that part of me that wishes like I knew what my own my own birth family looked like, right? There's that part of me that's like, oh, what do they look like? Do they look like my kids? Do my kids look like any of the aunts or uncles or anyone that's in, my birth family? But at the same time, I'm like, but I have this blessing of knowing that my daughter, who is not biologically my mom's, looks like my mom. And I think that's such a blessing in itself, because I feel like that kind of brings my mom such peace, right? Like she gets to look at my kids and see herself in them. And I think, that doesn't always happen for adoptees and their families. But I think in my circumstances, like my mom, I think that really does bring her peace. Like, oh, so many people have said that to her, and I can see her smile just brighten every time they say that. And she takes such pride in her grandchildren that I feel like that is like a little blessing for her, right? Growing up, actually, it's really funny. A lot of people that didn't know I was adopted did say I looked a lot like my mom, which I think is so funny because I'm so much darker than her and everything. Although during the summer, my mom can tan, but it's just funny to me because I'm like, oh, but I'm not, like I'm adopted. Like there's no way. But a lot of people say like, oh, but your personality is so much like your mom's. And it comes to that point where it's like nature versus nurture, right? Like how we're nurtured is like so important, but there's also the nature factor of like being who you are and your biological makeup and everything like that. So I think it's really interesting how those all come into play.
No, for sure. Hang on. Come here. I got a little guy that's sad. My husband's not home. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Did he fall? Is he okay? Oh, you ate some chalk. Okay, come here. Here, I'll hold you. Can you shut the door for me, sweetie? Okay. Okay. Go. You're okay. Hang on 1 sec. Okay. Here, let me give you my phone. What was I gonna say too? Sorry, a little bit of an interruption, but real life, right?
Oh, you're fine. I'm like, I have it all the time.
I love that you're like that your mom has that. It's okay. That you have that with your mom, because with me, like that's something my mom she teases all the time. Like your kids have my nose and your kids have this, but I look so drastically. So I think it's so like I really think that like that is so beautiful and that's amazing because for sure. I mean, even though I know your mom wholeheartedly, it's like those are my grandbabies no matter what, you know? Because
Yeah.
as I've gotten older too, I've learned that like blood does not make you family. Like even,
Yeah.
you know, even with friends and other people you make along the way, you know what I mean? So I think
Oh,
that's
it's
just
so true.
yeah, amazing and awesome. And so don't look beneath the truck, silly. Um, do you have any other thoughts or anything like that that you want to share, like for adoptees or for adoptive parents, anything like that?
I'm trying to think. I don't know. I think maybe to parents who are thinking about adoption and everything like that. I think it's honestly so important to um make sure that you're lining everything up for whoever you're going to adopt, right? Knowing where they're coming from, their circumstances, their background. Um And I think just getting as much information as you can so that way when you are ready to tell your child about where they come from and who they come from, they have all the knowledge that they can, as well as like for me internationally, it's really funny being an international adoption. You would think like, oh wow, like for some parents the culture might be lost, right? Because there's that gap of like not understanding or not knowing, or so I think one thing would be to prepare. If you don't know anything about the culture, prepare and maybe incorporate in your life while as the child is growing up to have some of that culture, because luckily my dad, like I said, his family originated from Mexico. And so, not the same, but very similar. And so, I feel like a lot of tradition and stuff I was able to learn through my dad, like, making tamales and all of these different things that, come more from like a Hispanic side. My mom has no idea. She didn't my she loves to joke that like, oh, I haven't met someone who, my dad was the first Mexican she had met. Like she grew up in New Hampshire. She grew up in a very like small town, predominantly white culture. And so she met my dad in Boston, and they just created this beautiful life together. And I think it's so wonderful that I had the opportunity to grow up with my culture, right? It was similar. It wasn't quite all of it, but there was bits and pieces that I got to kind of choose and pick and get to learn about. And I think sometimes being an international adoption, some people do lose that, right? They do lose that identity of like, well, and I feel like even to an extent I have lost that, right? I was raised by a mom who was predominant, she's white, and I didn't grow up with, my dad spoke Spanish but my mom didn't, and so I didn't learn that. So there are those things where there's just gaps. And I think as best as a parent can prepare for a child, that is, if it is an international adoption from whatever country, nation, wherever it may be, to try and learn as much as you can possibly, because I think that's so important for your child to know, to grow up knowing, have books, educate yourself about where they're coming from, even if it's just from a different state. Educate the background of what their parents, where their birth parents are growing up, or how they were raised, or just different things that you can incorporate into the child's life so that they know, they have a better understanding, because I feel like that will help make transition easier, as well as their life feel a little more full.
I love that. And every single adoptee I've talked to has said the same thing, because I feel like, I don't know, with our generation of adoptees, everything's closed. Everything is, you don't know a whole lot. So I think that's beautiful. And I know with kind of the movement of adoption right now per se, especially like the parents that I like are adopting young kids right now. They want to keep them open as much as they can so they have that connection, which I think is beautiful. I know sometimes that can be hard, but for the most part, it can be beautiful. And then culture, like it's amazing. It's beautiful how like there are some parents that are so dedicated to immersing their kids in that culture. They'll go seek out people and find things. Cause I mean, that's the thing, you look and you can find anything. And like, you know, especially in America, there's like so many different places you can, and I just love it. So I think it's beautiful. I think it's so. Well, thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for taking some time out of your night and doing this for me. I really, really appreciate it. And I loved getting to know you more. And I seriously love your spirit and your heart. You can just tell you're just an amazing, positive, wonderful person that has a lot of love. And so I just really appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with me tonight.
Well, thank you for asking. This was definitely a lot of fun.
Good. Thank you.